welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Jessica Henry Gray, and I'm really happy to have you with me today. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this rocky waterfall. So go ahead and like and subscribe if you like this video, and be sure to check out the links below. Alright, so let's jump in. We're going to explore our surroundings here, and I'll show you how I found this place. I'm down here in the Rocky River area again, and you can see back there behind me there the water and the sun. It's just a beautiful day, and I'm really excited to get down there and maybe do some rocks and paint something like that. So let's get inspired. And I also wanted to say a wonderful thank you. This is my 4th year. As of yesterday, I have been on YouTube and making YouTube videos for 4 years. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining me and making this a really memorable time, and I just thank you guys so much for all that you do, your wonderful comments, your supports, your shares, your likes, all of that. So I am deeply grateful to you, and let's get down here and find some inspiration. Then I'm going to be painting going that direction, and I know there's a bit of a glare on it, but it is really beautiful. You can hear the trains in the background. That's Cleveland just right over there. And I love the view this way as well, but yeah, gonna go that direction. We're gonna play with some rocks and a little bit of water today. Okay, so let's jump in. I'm gonna get a little closer to the water so I can get some rocks and things. Look at that sun and that glow.
All right, well, welcome back. I am going to do the rest of this video in voiceover. Starting out getting the palette ready: titanium white, cad yellow medium, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, phthalo green, and that's about it for today. And I'm beginning with a thumbnail sketch that's just a couple inches by about 2 inches, 2 by 3 or so. And I'm mapping out the overall composition of where I want the main things to go. And I'm glad I did this ahead of time, because I even adjusted a little bit beyond when I put it on my canvas. But I want it about that upper portion there to be a little darker than the lower, since the lower portion is going to be where all the focal area is. You can see I have the water, the banks of the water coming, look, that lower third on both sides, just coming to a point off center. And then sort of that vignette middle tone range with a few dark accents, and then that lighter splash of water as it comes through. Now today I have a 9 by 12 canvas, and I'm just putting a tone over it. Since it's a really complicated scene, I don't know that every square inch of it is going to be colored before I begin. The lower portion has a little bit more yellow ochre and blue in it when I tone, and then the upper half has more sienna. So I do that because I know that some of that water is going to show through. And so I'm just sort of doing a preemptive tone when I do it that way, especially on a more complicated scene. By toning the canvas, I feel like it's, in a psychological way, sort of halfway done, which it wasn't. This whole painting took a few hours to do. Well, technically about an hour and a half. But the climb in and out and the sketch and setting everything up, I was down there in this area for quite a while, a couple hours. And yeah, I learned a valuable lesson on this trip. I was, packing up and getting all my stuff ready, and I neglected to bring water. And I'll tell you what, by the time I got back, climbed up out of that canyon, got back up to my car, I got back up to the car and I found a water bottle that hadn't been opened, and it was hot because it had been sitting in the hot sun, but I dumped it over my head, my clothes, drank some. Yeah, it was a really difficult situation, and that was a priceless lesson. So take the advice from me, from one who has gone out and neglected something as vital as water. So yeah, that was a very scary situation. And, you know, kind of being down here alone in this deep canyon, up steep rock walls, I felt sort of vulnerable. So, you know, make sure that if, especially ladies, if you're out plein air painting alone, maybe bring someone. If you can't, pepper spray or whatever, just make sure that you feel safe wherever you go and that you're comfortable. All right, so let me get back to the painting here. This painting is, I'm just mapping out, again, I know it looks really abstract, but I did want to touch a little bit on the abstract in plein air painting. All abstract art, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's good, it does have a sense of composition. And I want you to think about that when you're painting whatever it is you're painting, that there is an abstract quality that it may not make a lot of visual sense, but you have to have composition and balance and design to whatever it is you're working on. So in this case, I liked that darker passage of that stone wall behind the waterfall, kind of offering a sort of a visual support, that backdrop of a darker value. Pretty soon here I show you that scene. I'll split the screen. And then you can see things starting to take shape. I add a little bit of white to sort of demonstrate for myself where that lighter value is going to be in the painting. So I'm starting now on color. And again, at this point, all I do with the odorless mineral spirits is clean my brush. I don't do any of the painting now anymore. I used a little bit of it just to map out the composition. So now if I want to thin my paint, I use a little bit of linseed oil, just a little. So taking ultramarine blue, little yellow ochre, cad yellow, that was my darker shadow. Little burnt sienna will really darken it too. And then to lighten it a little bit, I add less of the blue and brown and more of the yellow. A touch of white will make it cool. And I do like that for my background area. I want a cool greenish blue back there, especially this bush off to the side. You can see it in my photo here. A very cool blue next to that bright, warm, sunny green, which I thought was a really nice accent. And then over in the shadow, just beyond that cool blue-green, is a little sienna bush, and I added some sienna. I don't know if it was a touch of fall or just maybe that bush had died, but it really added a lot of warmth to my scene, and I thought it was an important aspect to the color composition. Yes, color plays a key role in your composition as well. I have often talked about cool and warm variety throughout your paintings. So you want a balance of cool and warm. You don't want it 50-50. Paintings generally tend towards mostly cool with a little warm, or mostly warm with a little cool. And this picture was had a lot of kind of both. All the shadows were very cool and blue, and all the foreground had just this wonderful warmth into the water and the sunlight green and all that. So I would say, however, that there is more cool to this painting than warmth. And then, of course, with color, most of the painting was a predominant varying shade of greens and grays. So given that green's complementary color is red, I want to grab any little bits of that as I can. Even towards the end of this video, where there's a little bit of violet on the surface of the water where shadows being cast over the foam, that added just a touch of redness, cool redness to the water that it needed. Okay, so in the back there, I'm building up the layers of the bushes and the rocks. You can see I begin working a painting in layers, but it's wet on wet, so the layers build on themselves. And if you use a thinner layer of paint at the beginning, you can build thicker paint over the top of that. In the background, I want my paint to be a little bit thinner because it's in the background. I don't want a lot of thick impasto paint back there, because impasto thick paint breaks up the surface of the canvas and it draws the eye. Backgrounds always need to be supportive. They don't need to draw the attention. So back there, I have the thinner layer that I used to map out the composition, and then I'm slowly building up the layers of my values and colors. So I start with a dark, and then beyond that, I build a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter. So I have that rock passage, and then the smaller rocks as the water starts to take shape below it. And I'm just mapping out the darks of the rocks. And I'm squinting down at the scene, and I'm isolating where the key rocks are that are identifying that passage. So this whole painting, I really want to focus on working in layers with you. And again, layering the darks, and then we'll build up. You can see this passage, the side of the hill. I'm starting with a darker layer. Now the photo that I have here for you to look at is lighter. I took this shot when I was done painting, but when I started painting, there was more shadow. And so that's what I was actually painting here. And of course, we know photos will wash out an area and make it appear lighter and the shadows blacker. So be careful working from photos. That's one of the major problems that artists confront in working from photos, is that the values are too extreme. Whites are too white, shadows are too black. So that's why I always emphasize working from life as much as possible. You will see the values more accurately. Your whites are not completely washed out and your shadows are not completely black. Same thing with working still lifes. Never work a still life from a photo because of the same reason. They're so easy to set up. Just set one up and learn to study what's really happening in the shadows, what's really happening in the highlights. And then you're going to put that in your paintings. There's so much vitality and energy and life to shadows and highlights. And so I really want you to observe that, especially in plein air painting. So that's what you can see I'm focusing now on building up the water. Look at in the picture behind me, I zoomed the camera out so you could see the water there has a strong yellow ochre and burnt sienna color combination. Further back, it gets a little greener, a little more yellow ochre and ultramarine blue in the water. A little bit of white gives it that chalky look to the water surface, not the surface, the under the water. And we'll get to the surface towards the end. And so I'm building it up on both sides. The water is the focal area of the whole painting. And so it's important that I start building that up as I'm starting to build up the rocks and the other areas around it. It's kind of one of those things in a painting where you're sort of trying to work on getting everything blocked in first, and then you can start refining some of the different passages. So we blocked in the darks. Now we're blocking in the colors and values, especially in the foreground and the water. So there's a shadow on the water, and I was painting it in. Eventually I take that out because that shadow was a result of a long log that was laying across the surface of the water. I didn't paint in because I didn't feel it was necessary. More of a distraction, so I ended up taking that out. But on the other side, off to that left, there was this beautiful purple shadow being cast from the trees onto the surface of the water. As time went on, and it's one of the reasons you want to learn to be efficient, that shadow sort of started to disappear while I was painting. And I liked it, so I tried to keep bringing it back. But the longer I took painting this, every time I looked back over there, the shadow was gone. So when working with plein air, one of the many challenges, you gotta be efficient because light changes, light moves. Someone had asked, why do I always paint small? Why on a smaller canvas? Well, that's one of the reasons. So many elements of the scene change so quickly. And the objective of a plein air painting is to get out there and capture the light, the shadow, the scene, the atmosphere. It's not about creating a high polished painting. Now, if you wanted to do something like that, you'd go back to the scene during the same specific time and lighting for a few days. And I may do that in an upcoming video, but everything changes so quickly. If you wanted to do an elaborate painting, I do not recommend trying to do it in one day. You have to go back a few days. All right, so small painting, less area to cover, you can get the information down quickly, and that's the whole point. All right, so now I'm blocking in. I masked in sort of the color of the water, not all over it, because I knew that somewhere down here in this corner I was going to be putting in some rocks. So right now I'm thinking compositionally. I'm not being 100% true to nature, And you are free to do that with plein air. You can rearrange things to suit your canvas composition to whatever extent you need. So I had some rocks here in the water. I loved their shape, and I wasn't messing with the angles and the shapes. That's important to note. When you are using nature, you can rearrange rocks, but you do have to keep the angle of their perspective accurate. Otherwise, they're going to be off and your picture won't read perspectively accurate. So the water rocks, I'm just laying those down nice, strong shadow horizontal. And back there, there's some large rocks, boulders, as they came up from the surface edge of the water. And I loved how they had a sense of weight and substance in the composition. So I'm putting those in as big masses with a strong dark shadow underneath. Again, it's one of those areas where something is felt more than perceived. But they were big rocks, so I had to paint them in a little more accurate. All right, now beginning in some of the smaller areas down around the foreground, the rocks, and just refining some of those passages. Now these rocks that were under the surface of the water, they begin with just the shadow, and that's what I paint first. But first I'm kind of going through here and cleaning out some of the mass chunks so that they sort of have more of a blend between the color value areas. So off to the side here where I had that ochre sienna water, and then it blended into the green water, I'm softening those edges. And then laying in some more shadows. I'll split the screen here and you can see a little bit more information as I work on the water. Alright, so you can see here I'm starting to take the white and blending it into the water. I had to soften and blend the background of the water before doing this because that white is the top layer, the top surface of the water. Now, one of the challenges with painting water is to take what we understand to be white and to paint it white. You can't do that. Start with the color that you see just under the white. White on water is always the very last thing you add. Those are the sparkles and the splashes right at the very end. But you build up those whites with sort of a bluish chalky gray, and then you build that lighter value as you develop towards those sparkles. That's at the very end, and you'll see I do that at the very end. Okay, so I'm at the place in my painting where I feel like everything is really coming together and it's starting to really have that definition that I'm looking for. I can now come back through and build up the layers of detail and information. So these trees in the background that were long and tall, sort of hidden, we don't see their tops, but they're suggested and they feel more like a forest. I'm adding those. In the passages where there's a darkness, and I'm putting trees in, that's a lighter value that I'm putting down. And they really were a lighter value, especially as the light was hitting it. So it's sort of a grayish tone for that. And then adding a few little bits of information for the leaves and the light to come through, and just enough so that it's not distracting, just to provide that sense of foliage. And I'll do it on the other side as well. And you be careful with adding more information to passages that you've already done, because you can quickly override and over complicate what was considered simple. So really season it very lightly. Adding a little more information back there as those dark shadows slipped away under the trees, some cooler rocks sliding back into the shadows. So I'm taking a mixture of cadmium yellow light, or cadmium yellow medium, a little bit of phthalo green, and a little bit of white, and just the smallest bit of phthalo green. And that gives me a sunlit green. So when I'm painting light being transparent through leaves and grass, whatever, when I need sunlight to really affect a green, that is my color combination. Cadmium yellow, medium, or light, you can use one or the other. The smallest touch of phthalo green and a little bit of white really gives you that intense sunlit effect. You can do without the white too, just to mix it up a little bit, and then sometimes add some white, sometimes not. You can see in this tree over here, I do a little bit of both. So I have piles down there on my palette of different combinations of sunlit green. Now I'm not using any yellow ochre to make the green, except where it slips into shadow, because it's a very neutralizing yellow. It's very earthy. And when I want to really capture sun, cadmium yellow is the secret for that. Don't just use straight cadmium yellow for that though, because it just looks, it all of a sudden by itself has a very fakey, artificial flavor to it. Same with the phthalo green. That is like stoplight green. And you really don't find that color in nature ever. But when you mix it with other colors, it's very powerful, very effective. So this bush here, this tree was lacking in form, so I felt that I needed a stronger shadow to carve out some of these more abstract designs and shapes in the bush. And then it also provided a dark backdrop for my rock that was out front. Just taking a little bit of burnt sienna, yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, a little bit of white. I'm coming back through here now and I'm going to start defining more of the middle tone colors on these rocks, starting with the largest one in the background that was sort of river routing, that great big one. Grabbed a little bit of the lighter mixture to, in effect, put the dappled sun on that big guy back there. And now I'm going through and just laying in the middle tone on all these rocks. And I jump back to my palette every now and then because I may pick up a color that has a little more blue in it, or a little more sienna, or a little more ochre. So I have different colors that I grab on my palette just to show the variety in colors in the rocks, and that some of the rocks are tipped so that they're more in shadow, and some are tipped so that they're more in light. So it's good to have different colors mixed up like that on your palette. I never go through and mix up all my colors ahead of the whole painting process, because there's a lot of reasons why that's ineffective and does not teach you to be an observant painter. You just have your formulaic colors mixed out. When you're painting, you can assess and make those determinations and decisions in the process of painting. So in this passage here, where I'm specifically working on rocks, I will have a few colors mixed out ahead of time, but never prior to the entire painting process. So now again, I'm popping in some of those dark shadows that got a little lost in the application of the paint for those middle tone colors. As you saw, I already put some highlights on the trunks of those trees, but they're not highlights created by sun. They are highlights created by bounced light being affected by the rocks below them. So they're sort of like a cooler shadow picking up ambient light. And I did not want them to be obtrusive and that we go back and observe them, but more feel that light from those rocks are bouncing up and hitting those trees. So painting rocks and shadows, you don't want sharp edges, really sharp edges, a little bit to show they're rocks, but not much. Keep them in shadow, keep them quiet. Again, that's one of the beautiful things of painting from life, from nature, is you pick up the subtleties and shadows and that you wouldn't pick up from a photo. So anyway, coming back over here on the lit side, the stronger the shadows, the brighter the light. So here we have these sharp contrasting shadows because the light's really intense on that side of the creek. Now I'm coming back through and just kind of cutting in and softening edges where the shadow meets the middle tone. Eventually I'll come back through here and add more highlights on the sunlit side of the rocks. The sunlit spots on the sunny side of the creek have a little more cadmium yellow in them and a little more white, just to really show the sunlight hitting those rocks. On the shadowed side of the creek, I have a little more yellow ochre into the white, because I wanted to reflect that there is dappled light hitting those shadowy rocks, but I don't want them looking like they are sitting in hot, bright, direct sun. So on the left side where those rocks are in the shadow, it's a more subtle sunlight color than what's in the light. So back on focusing on the right side, the sunny side of the creek, I'm just coming through and cleaning up some of the rocks. I will also, people ask often how I keep my brushes and colors from getting muddy. And I always say one thing you don't really see on these videos is how often I'm wiping my brush off on my paper towel. Keeping your paper towel in your non-painting hand is vital to painting. It is one of your number one most important painting techniques that you can adapt. This is one of the reasons why your paper towel quality is important. Don't use the super cheap ones, but whatever else is going to absorb the paint off your brush is very important. Keeping the brush mostly clean. You don't have to clean it in your turpentine every time you get a different color, but just wipe it very well. And I also roll my brush on my palette, which is another thing you don't see on the videos. It starts to build up around the ferrule, the metal part, and I just roll it on the palette. And by doing that, you kind of save some of the paint too. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm taking this beautiful mossy green, which is again that mixture of phthalo green, cadmium yellow, and little white, and it has a little bit more green and blue in it and less of the brilliant yellow. And I'm coming through and adding the moss color on the rocks. At some point, I will come through and add a brighter green on the mossy rocks that are getting hit by more sun. And so back in the forest there, I'm adding a little bit more layers now to the foliage in and around the trees. A little bit of that shadowy green. So taking again some of the yellow, obviously I'm painting sunlight now. Through the foliage, some sun was creeping through and just hitting some of those leaves. It has a little bit less of the cadmium yellow than in other places because I didn't really want it to compete either. It wasn't quite as intense as the sunlight hitting the leaves, which act like little pieces of stained glass. When it's down low, it's less because there's more shadows wrapping around those leaves. Now I've reached that part of the painting where I'm working on finesse and the final stages and what needs to be done to really convey my message. There are some edges that are too sharp. There's not enough sparkles. So I'm going through now and just making the painting sing because it's basically beaten to submission. I've got the trees where I need them, the rocks where I need them. Everything's doing what it needs to do. I just need to now make it all come together. Okay, so I'm preparing here with this darker mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to paint some more of the rocks on the left side of the painting. And I just start with a darker shadow where the mass of the rock is sitting. Because when I looked up and saw the rock's shapes, I just started with the base of it being a dark mass and whatever that shape is, and, applying it in that context, as well as the passages of rocks that I saw under the water, and keeping those shadows under the water very soft and muted. You don't want sharp, strong lines when you're painting something that is under the surface of the water. Keep it soft and muted. And that's what I'm working on over here and over there. I'm just a soft little suggestion. And I felt that some of those masses where the highlights of the water were slipping back towards us, the viewer, were a little too nondescript. So I needed more of the ochre passage on that left side. So these pieces of lighter color rock are the rocks on that side that are peeking up above the water, and they're drier. They're not the wet rock underneath. Right now, I'm just laying them where I see them compositionally. So that's important to put those down, and then I'll come back through and give them a wet water line. I'm also putting them where I see them connected to the rock underneath the water. So you can see that it's not a super refined process. It's something actually very simple, just a shadow and a soft bit of highlight or a shift in value for the rock under the water. And then as you see here, the rocks that are above the surface, they get a water line where the water has made it wet. And I'll come back through here and soften that a little bit too, because it's a little obtrusive and you notice it right away, and I don't want it to be jumping out at you. So before I move over to there, I'm going to work on some little bit more of the rocks and water surfaces over off to the right. The pebbles and smaller rocks under the surface there, I felt added a lot to the composition and the feel of the water as it comes up to the shore. And there they are. You can see too, they're just little soft shadows with a slight shift in shadow value for reflecting the surface of the rock under the water. All right, so this rock here, as it leads the viewer into the painting, I felt was pretty important. Half of the rock, or more than half the rock, was under the water, and I already painted that. Now I'm painting the rock, that part of it that is above the water, and it's a chalky, sort of brownish shade, and then I gave it a water line. And towards the end here, I will add sparkles of water rushing around the dry part. All right, now I'm at that part of the painting towards the end where I can start to add more of the information of the water and what it's doing and its shape and its activity and splashes. So I'm using mostly white at this point, and I'm allowing the white in passages to blend in with some of the colors underneath where I'm applying it. If in case it's a little too bright or white, I can let it sort of mix and mingle with whatever else is going on. All right, so it's very important at this point to not overdo it. This is something that you can easily do because it starts to really take the form of looking like water moving over and through and around rocks. So be careful that you don't go too much. A little bit, step back. How is it going? A little bit more. Rearrange. You can scrape off if you don't like something, but just be very selective and careful as you move forward. All right, now earlier in this video I talked about that little accent of violet in the shadow that acted as a redness to the water. It's subtle, it's violet, it's there, but it's not jumping out at you. And I needed that shadow in that area because it was just too flat of a blob of white sea foam. So that is acting as just something to break that up, and it was a shadow and I needed it. All right, so now where the water is actually cascading, I'm finding that there's a greenish tint under the waterfall itself. So I'm starting with that, and then I do the foam over and splashes around and over the top of that. So right now I'm just taking a very small brush and I'm going through and I'm just defining the creek as it flows in and around the rocks up there. That's really all that's happening in this latter part of this painting. Now these are the very last stages of a painting where I take my little teeny tiny brush. I often don't put on my material list for my workshops a tiny brush because I worry that people will have a tendency to paint too much with it. But it's good to have one of these in your brush selection because getting in there and adding a few tiny sparkles is easier with a little tiny brush. And that's what I'm doing with this. Just adding those little touches of sparkle throughout the painting. Don't need very many. And that is it. I will add a few more sparkles into the trees, and that wraps up this painting. Now I wanted to tell you, while I tie this all up, is I've got my Ohio workshop still has some spots. If you're interested in taking a 2-day, very safe workshop, and that's October 8th and 9th. And I'm excited for this one. And the Oregon workshop is full, so I look forward to those of you who are coming. But the Ohio workshop still has about 5 spots left if you're interested in joining, as well as my Zoom workshops. One of the Zoom workshops is going to be doing landscape painting from a photo, and I also have a portrait workshop coming up in the format of Zoom. So I'm excited for those. You guys check out the links below if you have more questions. I'll be happy to answer them. And again, just to wrap up this painting, you can see that I've just added a few more sparkles, working my way in and around.
Alright everybody, well that wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it and we'll give this a try. Even if you want to just work from a photo, these kinds of pictures are easy to find, and I do hope you explore this exciting way to paint and work in layers. Alright you guys, check out the links below, and I hope to see you at one of my upcoming workshops. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Alright you guys, have a good week. See you next time. Bye-bye.